Gentlemen, welcome to our channel. If you, like me, do not support adultery and believes that cheaters should be fully responsible for their actions, then like this video and do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Well, let's get started.
My husband and I tied the knot 12 years ago, having lived together for almost 16 years. We're both in our 30s. We have two wonderful children, a 10-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter. What strikes me about my husband is his ability not only to keep the family together while we both work, but also how he manifests himself as a father. Even my parents value him more than me and my brother. Often, my friends remind me how lucky I am to have devoted myself to a long-term relationship with such an exceptional person. It was during the period when I started working evening shifts to adjust to my husband's schedule that I ran into another man at my workplace. It is curious that this happened during a normal fire alarm. Coincidentally, our gathering places were nearby, and he decided to come up to me and get acquainted. Although he also works in the same building, his office is on a different floor. Unlike my husband, this man is tall and spends a lot of time in the gym. In addition, he exudes an aura of self-confidence, and his appearance is so captivating that it can be compared with a professional model. Unfortunately, despite the circumstances I've already mentioned, I admit my grave mistake. Another man was paying me excessive attention. His constant text messages flooded my phone, often contained pictures of his flawlessly embossed abs, and even turned into a frank plane. He exerted subtle pressure on me to reciprocate. Mentally, I understood the inappropriateness of our exchanges, but the feeling of trembling in my stomach engulfed me completely. It was like I was transported back to my school years, enjoying the joy that accompanies teasing and flirting. Paradoxically, despite the fact that I perfectly understood what this was fraught with and that it could destroy my marriage if my husband found out the truth, this danger gave the situation additional sharpness and attractiveness. I reached a depressing moment when I convinced myself that my dependence on my husband as the main person taking care of the house no longer corresponded to my desires. The seeds of doubt have taken root, convincing me that my husband does not provide me with the attention I crave. It pains me to admit it, but I got to the point where I was constantly fixated on my phone, looking forward to his next message. After a deeper bond had been established between us for 2 months, he invited me to lunch on Friday. We went to the meeting, using his car and choosing a convenient option. As a result, we decided to enjoy lunch in his car, valuing the time spent together. Under the influence of circumstances, one thing replaced another, and we were involved in passionate kisses, which inevitably escalated into a moment of intimacy in the cabin of his car. After our meeting in the back seat, I was overcome by a feeling of some cheap meanness. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the disgusting nature of my actions. The situation was aggravated by the fact that our meeting took place without any protection. The fog of the affair dissipated, and I realized with alarm that I had betrayed my husband, and it was the most painful experience I had ever experienced. At first, the alluring picture of the forbidden seemed tempting, but as soon as we crossed the threshold, a wave of anxiety swept over me. Guilt and shame overwhelmed my consciousness. It became clear that what I was striving for did not correspond to my true desires, and I made a huge mistake in my decisions. When I got home, I tried to find solace in the shower, but no amount of water could rid me of the deep shame that gripped me. When I entered the bedroom, my husband was peacefully dozing, unaware of the shock that had gripped me. I stood in silent reflection, and tears flowed down my cheeks as I realized the gravity of my act. Deep remorse seized me, and I realized the gravity of my act. The next morning, I woke up to the delightful sound that my husband was making, delighting our children. They cuddled up to each other and watched TV, and the husband arranged an interactive spectacle, participating in a sword duel with an imaginary opponent. Laughter and giggles echoed through the room, illuminating their joyful faces. Captured by this delightful sight, I froze in the doorway, silently immersed in the warmth of their communication. I tried to take meaningful steps to correct the situation. Although I wasn't going to admit my misdeeds to my husband, I was determined to become the best version of myself for him. We began to engage in intimate relationships every day, using every opportunity for communication. If circumstances did not allow, I tried to please him by making deliberate gestures before or after each meeting. In addition, I took responsibility for the kitchen, began to cook homemade food more often, and resumed our cherished tradition of dating. Thanks to the unwavering support of my parents, who readily come to the rescue as a nanny on the first phone call, we were able to devote time to the development of our relationship. In truth, I can confirm that our bond was stronger than ever before. When that man invited me to lunch again, I gathered my strength and refused. Despite my refusal, he continued to bombard me with messages. Deciding to break this connection, I deleted all the inappropriate photos I sent him, hoping that my silence would show my disinterest and force him to stop communicating. Unfortunately, he didn't calm down. He decided to meet me face-to-face at the workplace and demanded to explain why I ignored his messages, while expressing a desire to repeat our carelessness. I pulled myself together with unwavering determination, gave a decisive refusal, and made it clear in no uncertain terms that our previous meeting was an unfortunate mistake. I asked him to respect my wishes and leave me alone. Despite my repeated refusals, he stubbornly continued his courtship. In the end, having plucked up the courage, I told him about my love for my husband and stressed that there could be no comparisons between them. Unfortunately, my words seemed to deeply offend him, and he left. At that moment, I desperately hoped that this would mean the end of his persecution. The same day I returned home, eagerly greeted my husband with a kiss and struck up a casual conversation. We were planning to go to the movies together, and I went to the shower. But when I came out of the bathroom, I was overcome by a feeling of anxiety. My husband was sitting without taking his eyes off the phone. Tears were streaming down his face, indicating that something terrible had happened in my absence. Concerned about my husband's condition, I anxiously asked what happened. In response, he handed me his phone, and when I read its contents, I was overcome by a feeling of deep horror. This man took the liberty to forward our entire conversation, including candid photos that I foolishly shared, as well as disturbing details of our physical connection in his car. I was shocked and couldn't find the words, trying to understand the seriousness of the situation. Caught off guard, my husband boldly started a conversation with me, seeking the truth. Faced with his direct question, I made a difficult choice and finally confessed to all my misdeeds. He began to ask me if I was going to confess and if I took this secret with me to the grave. In an unsteady voice, I confessed that if it weren't for this shocking revelation, I would really be silent, hiding the truth indefinitely. Feeling remorse, I tried to convey to him that my act was an unforgivable mistake and expressed deep regret, surpassing all other feelings in the world. I desperately begged him to stay, promising to do my best to make amends and save what was left of our relationship. But despite my persuasions, he made the painful decision to leave, leaving our house for 2 days, during which he did not answer my calls and did not respond to my messages. Trying to get through to him, I even tried to contact him at his place of work, but I found out that he took the day off. After returning home, he spent some time with our children and seemed to be deep in thought. Then he began to pack a bag, signaling the seriousness of his intentions. It was with a heavy heart that he informed me that irreparable damage had been done to our relationship and that it had come to an end. In a serious tone, he explained that if I think I can do this without consequences, then he has the same right to realize his desires, regardless of the consequences. Then he unleashed a flurry of emotions on me, pouring out his heart. He spoke frankly about the many sacrifices he made for our relationship and the sanctity of our marriage. He said that he refused to get an education because our son appeared and financial stability began to prevail over personal aspirations. He talked about how he distanced himself from friends for the sake of my comfort and constantly put my needs and desires above his own. Incredibly, he devoted more time to our children than I did. Although he treasured them very much, he rarely had the opportunity to give preference to his own needs. I, on the contrary, often walked with friends after work, freely allocating time for myself. Despite his selfless actions and unfailing love, despite the fact that he accepted my shortcomings and difficulties, I had the audacity to betray him by having an affair. He couldn't understand how it was possible to continue living with a person who didn't show him any respect. He doubted whether the attention I had shown him lately was due to genuine concern or whether he was driven by a sense of guilt that overwhelmed him. Realizing the need to prioritize his own well-being, he made the difficult decision to move out, switching attention to himself. As a result, we made adjustments to our financial situation by deciding to keep our finances separate. It is worth noting that my husband earns almost 3 times more than me. To effectively manage expenses, we maintain several accounts designed for different purposes. We have a shared account designed exclusively for joint expenses, such as paying bills and buying groceries. In addition, we have an account dedicated to the needs of our children, and another account dedicated to emergencies and savings. Just last week, in accordance with the financial rules established by us, he deposited the required amounts into our joint accounts. This brought me relief, as it indicated that he was not completely detached from the circumstances that I had brought down on us. We have scheduled a meeting for tomorrow to have a heart-to-heart talk about our current situation and the prospects for the development of our relations. I firmly decided to convey to him the full depth of my remorse, to admit the grave mistake I had made. I am ready to fulfill any request of his to make amends. I am ready to take on additional household responsibilities, reduce the time spent with friends, and prioritize the well-being and upbringing of our children. In addition, if he expresses a desire to resume his studies, I undertake to provide him with all possible support. I am overwhelmed with a sense of despair from the need to correct the damage done, to the point that I am even ready to allow my husband to explore relationships with other women if he wants it. But I was faced with the problem of how to approach this conversation with him so that he was sincere and devoid of manipulation. Throughout this ordeal, he did not mention the divorce and, as far as I know, kept our situation a secret, not trusting it to others. I trusted my mother and asked for her advice, but I was disappointed. However, I asked her to keep it confidential, and as far as I know, she complied with this request. She kept it confidential and didn't tell anyone else about my dilemma. The fact that my husband has not touched on the topic of divorce gives me a glimmer of hope, but at the same time makes me feel anxious about what our upcoming conversation might turn out to be. Uncertainty is hanging over me, and I am preparing for any possible outcome. In conclusion, I must say that the last few days have been an excruciating nightmare. The gap between us has grown much larger than I could have imagined, and has strangled our once bright and loving marriage. The weight of my husband's avoidance hangs in the air, intensifying the suffering. I didn't know yet that tonight this tumultuous roller coaster ride would take the most heartbreaking turn, as I mentioned earlier. As a result of an unexpected turn of events, my husband contacted me and asked me to arrange for our children to stay with my parents. Then he suggested that we meet in a few hours at a fancy restaurant that had a special meaning for both of us, the very place where he took me on our first date. At first, I was comforted by the thought that we would meet in a familiar place filled with sentimental value and cherished memories. But as time went on, doubts crept into my soul, changing my worldview. It began to seem to me not so much a gesture of hope as a turn of justice. It began to seem to me that the place where our relationship blossomed could also become the place of their imminent breakup. It seemed that the cycle had completed its full turn in an instant, turning what had been a positive into an annoying negative. Despite the fact that we have been in close proximity to each other for the past 6 weeks, my husband has deliberately avoided me, leaving me without proper attention. But when we finally found ourselves face to face, I couldn't help but notice the changes that had taken place. He had noticeably lost weight, had a fresh haircut, was impeccably dressed, as if he was preparing for an important event. It became obvious that he was ready to move on from our difficult relationship. When we entered the dimly lit restaurant, there was a tension in the air like a hidden storm. The atmosphere crackled with unspoken words, and I prepared myself for what lay ahead. At the moment when my instinct of wanting to hug him flared up, he abruptly stopped me. We sat at a secluded corner table, away from other customers, which created an atmosphere of awkward privacy. There was an awkward silence in the air, unwilling to part as we both avoided eye contact. Butterflies were constantly fluttering in my stomach. a familiar sensation accompanying moments of approaching denouement. Finally, breaking the suffocating silence, he let out a deep sigh. His voice trembled, and he began, "Listen, I need to discuss something with you." A surge of adrenaline coursed through my veins as our eyes met, revealing in his gaze a stormy mixture of suffering, rage, and betrayal. I braced myself for the inevitable, even though a tiny glimmer of hope whispered that maybe we could still salvage the pieces of our broken bond. His voice trembled with surging emotions as he continued to speak, unable to ignore the harsh reality of what had happened between us and my colleague. The revelation broke him, split us irreparably, and although he tried to comprehend and understand all this, he admitted that he could not do it. Sleepless nights tormented him, painfully going over every detail in his mind, and led to a painful realization. He could no longer carry this load. His words hung in the air like a dense, suffocating fog, leaving a heavy imprint on the once hopeful atmosphere. When tears welled up in my eyes, I instinctively reached for his hand, looking for comfort and connection. But he abruptly recoiled, ceasing all physical contact. His voice trembled with fragile vulnerability as he uttered his next words, and it was clear how hard this decision was given to him. "I have made a decision," he continued in a broken voice. "We need to get a divorce." At that moment, my world shattered into many pieces. The suffering reflected in his eyes became a mirror image of the piercing pain that tormented my heart, but I refused to accept this fate without a struggle. "No," I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks, desperately clinging to a glimmer of hope. "We can't give up. Let's deal with this, for the sake of our children. Please give us a try." My every being prayed for the revival of our love, not allowing it to fade so easily. But he shook his head. His determination was unyielding, and cast a dark shadow over all the remnants of optimism. Faced with his firm determination, I found myself in a suffocating silence. My husband's determination to end our marriage remained unyielding, and I felt an indescribable sense of emptiness. Uncontrollable sobs escaped from my trembling lips. It seemed that the foundation of my world was collapsing before my eyes, making me absolutely powerless. Guilt, regret, and heartache intertwined in me, causing a storm of emotions. And yet, in the depths of despair, a spark of defiance lit up. I gathered the strength to wipe away the tears, and with full determination I looked into his eyes, intending to convey my truth. Having answered decisively, I gained strength and told my truth. "If you really want it, if you are determined to see it through, then so be it. But know this, I will not make it easier for you. I will fight to the last to protect our family, and I will not sign the divorce papers without a fight." He nodded, his face still showing the pain that was similar to my own. "I didn't expect anything less from you," he whispered softly. As we sat frozen in a precarious balance between the past and the future, I was overcome by deep sadness. It was painful for me to watch our once beautiful love story unfold, turning into a tragedy. The road loomed ahead, ominous from the weight of the upcoming mental pain and uncertainty. Amid the floods of tears and complete self-doubt, I firmly knew one thing: I will not give up without a fight, for the sake of the love we once shared and the life we painstakingly built together. But the days that followed turned into a tedious mess, an incessant flurry of paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and disapproving views of loved ones. The exposure of my indiscretion seemed to spread like wildfire, spurred on by my husband's thirst to justify himself. He decided to reveal our shattered trust to everyone we knew, leaving me with an unbearable sense of shame. The burden of constant condemnation and whispers behind my back began to undermine my spirit, exhausting me every day. The mounting pressure pushed me to the edge, threatening to break my spirit. Even my family, who have always been my reliable support, now expressed their deep disappointment and heartache about my actions. They sided with my husband, persuading me to agree to the divorce he wanted. The weight of their expectations, combined with the incessant pressure from all sides, became unbearable. I felt trapped, forced to make decisions that I wasn't emotionally ready for. During the tumultuous divorce process, I gathered all my strength to fiercely fight for primary custody of our children. Despite my blunders, I believed that I could become a loving and devoted mother for them. With firm determination, I sought to shelter them from the storm of a broken marriage and give them stability and love, even amid chaos and pain. During the divorce process, I argued to the court, drawing attention to my husband's busy work schedule and arguing that this hinders his ability to provide the necessary stability and care for our children. In addition, I stressed the need to pay child support, given his significantly higher income, as well as alimony to maintain the lifestyle to which I am accustomed. But the court's decision showed the harsh reality. They recognized that my husband spent more time with the children because of my busy work and therefore granted us joint custody. It was a bittersweet victory. But on the other hand, I continued to be an integral part of my children's lives, providing them with the love, support, and care they needed. The privilege of participating in their upbringing gave me hope against the background of the difficulties associated with overcoming the consequences of our broken marriage. At the same time, realizing that joint guardianship was granted, I did not have the opportunity to individually influence my children, which I counted on. This additional disappointment weighed on me. In addition, the court rejected my request for alimony, considering them unnecessary due to the divided custody responsibilities. No less disappointing was the refusal to satisfy my application for alimony recovery. It seemed that the universe conspired against me, leaving me alone to deal with the consequences of my actions. When the divorce process came to an end, I found myself in the abyss of darkness and emptiness. My husband moved out, and our communication was now limited exclusively to issues related to children. The emptiness that formed after the rupture of our once close connection left an imprint of deep loneliness on me, which further increased the severity of my own guilt. No matter how hard I tried, my husband stubbornly refused to communicate with me on any other topics. The painful reality has come that the relationships we once cherished are now irretrievably destroyed. Despair made me reach out to my husband and ask for forgiveness for the pain caused, express my deep regret. But my words were met with an icy silence, indicating his emotional detachment. It became painfully clear that he had moved away from our union, breaking the emotional ties that once bound us. The weight of isolation and loneliness has become exorbitant, squeezing my spirit. At that moment, I realized that I had lost not only my husband, but also my life and family, which I treasured so much. After the divorce, I was shattered. The remnants of what was once whole hurt in me. I realized that I had lost the support and security that I once took for granted. The familiar pillars on which my life was held now lay in ruins, leaving behind a void full of uncertainty and pain. And yet, amid the darkness, a glimmer of hope was preserved. In this desert, I clung to the fragile hope that time could serve as a catalyst for healing and growth. I wanted to rebuild my ruined life not only for my own sake, but also to regain the trust and love of those whom I had hurt the most, my children. With all determination, I vowed to seek redemption, to heal the wounds inflicted by my own actions, and to create a future in which love and trust will be restored. I am now in complete despair as I recently found out that I am HIV infected. This scumbag not only destroyed my strong and loving family, he also infected me. I do not know how to live on once I made a mistake. I completely destroyed my life and caused emotional pain to my children. It seems to me that I am at a dead end. All my family and friends hate me for such a terrible act. And if they find out that I'm also HIV positive, they will completely bury me in their memory. Recently, I called my ex-husband and told him about my illness. I asked him for forgiveness and advised him to take an HIV test. He was furious. He took out all his anger on me. I was terribly ashamed. To my horror, a week later, I found out that my husband is also HIV positive and wants to destroy me. I don't even know how to handle everything I've done.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Put likes and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.